Well, good evening, everybody. We are so honored and excited that you have joined us on this Thursday night. We're grateful to be able to have you here and know how busy each and every one of you are. We are here to talk about the Great Redwood Trail. Now, obviously, especially during this pandemic, the coronavirus response, expediting the rollout of vaccines, and economic recovery, that remains the top priority for the state Senate, the state assembly, as well as the governor. And we wanted to be able to come together tonight because we're in a critical phase. We're in a critical phase of the Great Redwood Trail, which is why we wanted to be able to have this conversation and really get into this transformational project. Now, before we get into tonight's proceedings, I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to be able to join the conversation. If you'd like to be able to submit a question, a comment, a concern, a criticism, we want to hear from you tonight. Please email us, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. We're taking your questions, your comments, your concerns at senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. And in just a few moments, we're going to be getting into your comments. The Great Redwood Trail will transition a mostly abandoned 320-mile rail line into a world-class trail system that will stretch from the Humboldt Bay in the north to San Francisco Bay in the south. It's going to become the longest rail trail in the United States of America. And we've always known that creating the Great Redwood Trail was not going to be easy, nor will it be quick. There's going to be a ton of work ahead of us for the next many years. It's going to take time to be able to do this project right. And we need to work through a slew of details with our partners at the federal and state governments and right here at home, including closing down and cleaning up at the North Coast Railroad Authority, which has mismanaged this rail line for decades. But I've got to tell you, we're off to one heck of a start. Millions of dollars are already being invested in building this trail. Communities along the corridor, well, they're pushing to be able to have their segments to be constructed as soon as possible. And the momentum from the Great Redwood Trail is truly building. This evening, we are going to hear from some of the top trail experts in America who will give us a full briefing on where we're at with the trail now, where we've been, and where we're going. Then we're going to open up this town hall to each and every one of you because we're going to have a community conversation. But first and foremost, I wanted to be able to provide a small bit of background about the Great Redwood Trail and how we got here to tonight. We're going to see some pictures and some maps in just a few moments of the Great Redwood Trail. But for now, I'm going to ask you to imagine, close your eyes if you don't mind, imagine a strip of land roughly 50 feet wide and running for 320 miles from the edge of the San Francisco Bay in Marin County through the gorgeous vineyards of Sonoma County, showcasing the stunning beauty of Mendocino County, through the redwoods and oak-studded hills of the Eel River Canyon, and then you're going to end your hiking adventure on the fog-shrouded shores of Humboldt Bay. This strip of land has been a dedicated railroad right-of-way for over a century. At first, it was privately owned by rail companies, but in the 1970s, these companies fell on hard financial times. We saw a succession of bankruptcies and rail companies were closing down around the country. And here at home, as Highway 101 was improved, trucking became a lot cheaper, natural resources became scarcer, and maintaining the railroad became significantly more expensive. Stitching together money from a variety of sources, the North Coast Railroad Authority was created in 1992 when Kevin was 2 years old. And it was in an effort to be able to save freight rail on the North Coast. But NCRA faced the exact same challenges that the private railroads did in the preceding decades. And after a few difficult years, and then severe flooding and slides in 1998, the federal government came in and shut down the railroad. And it's never operated north of Cloverdale since. In 2008, on the southern segment of this line, voters approved the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit Authority, what we now call SMART. And this system is a passenger rail system that runs today and will one day run from Larkspur to Cloverdale. SMART has a mandate to be able to create a pedestrian and bicycle pathway that will run between all of their stations. This path will be the southern segment of the Great Redwood Trail and will connect directly with the northern segment, which will run from Cloverdale to Samoa in Humboldt County in the north. So speaking of the northern segment, just this morning, we have some big news. The North Coast Railroad Authority Board of Directors, which is now transitioning to a trail authority, voted to approve filing the paperwork with the federal government to rail bank. We're going to talk a lot about that term tonight, to rail bank a significant portion of the rail bed in Mendocino and Humboldt counties. So let's talk about that. The basics of rail banking, it essentially preserves rail bed for the future trail. It locks in that rail bed so you can put a trail on top of the rail. We're going to hear more about that from our experts in just a few moments. Finally, I want to talk about the economics of trails. At first, you wouldn't think that trails could transform a rural community, but trails have been transforming rural communities across America, in fact, across this planet for decades now. This trail is not going to just be a place for beauty or exercise, social and environmental benefits. It's far more than that. It's going to become an incredible economic driver for all the rural communities, many of them economically depressed, that it runs through and surrounds the trail. California's outdoor recreational economy right now is one of the fastest growing sectors in the Golden State. In fact, our outdoor recreational economy in California alone generates over $93 billion every year. It's responsible for 700,000 jobs. It generates $30 billion in wages. It brings in $6 billion in tax revenues, both for our local as well as state governments. The economic impact of trails is well documented. You're going to hear this from Laura in just a few moments. Numerous studies have shown that tourism and lodging spending increases with trails. Property values along a trail, they increase as well. Public sector expenditures, they increase when trails are constructed. Time and time again, we've been able to prove that trails create a huge benefit to local economies. All right, you have heard too much from me tonight, so let's get into the town hall. We are so grateful that we have Laura Cohen here tonight. She's the Western Regional Director of Rails to Trails. She's going to be able to introduce us to the concept of Rails to Trails, what the heck they are, how they've been successful, and how Rails to Trails have revitalized rural communities all across this nation. Laura, we welcome you to the town hall. You have 5 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator McGuire, and thank you for your leadership on this and the hard work of you and your staff to get it this far. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and share some slides. See if we can get this going. Here we go. I just want to introduce our organization. For those of you who aren't familiar, we are a national nonprofit. Rails to Trails Conservancy was founded in 1986, and we are the nation's largest trails, walking, and biking organization. We do a lot of different things. We are advocates for policy and funding. We partner with communities to plan and develop trails. We promote and protect trails. So just a little bit of background that's kind of part of our origin story. At the peak of the railroad network in the United States, there were 250,000 miles of active railway. Currently, there's about 140,000 miles, and most of that is due to the rise of the national highway system and the big shift to trucking to move goods. But that created an opportunity, 110,000 miles of rail corridor abandoned, and so our founders thought, well, how could that be reimagined? And that sparked the creation of our organization to preserve and repurpose those valuable rights of way for biking, walking, and connecting neighborhoods, towns, and regions. So here's a map that shows the development of Let's see, the animation doesn't seem to be working there, but it was supposed to show you the development of where the rail trails are across the country. So you'll just have to imagine that. Here's a little bit of, shows how far we've come. When we opened our doors in 1986, there were 250 miles of rail trails. Today, closing in on 25,000 miles. And those 25,000 miles are spread across 2,222 open rail trails. And on the horizon, we're aware of 845 projects that are underway that will add another 9,000 miles to that national network. So not that it's a competition, but we do like to keep track of the longest rail trails in the country. And you can see the longest right now is the Katy Trail in Missouri at 240 miles. And there's not a California trail even in the top 10, but you know, the Great Redwood is going to be 320 miles eventually. And that will be the longest rail trail in the country, which is pretty exciting. And we know that that's going to be an incredible draw to people from all over. It's pretty exciting. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the economic benefits that Senator McGuire alluded to in some of the research and reports that we've done or that we're aware of. So there's a variety of ways to assess economic benefit, and you know we don't need to dive into the details, but we are going to just share a few case studies from surveys of actual trail users. So the first one is the Great Allegheny Passage, which is 150 miles from Pennsylvania to Maryland. It bills itself as America's friendliest long-distance rail trail. And there's over 100,000 users who generate 2.5 million to the local economy just in Allegheny County alone. Our next case study, the Ohio and Erie Canal Towpath, annual users 2.5 million. It's an 87-mile route in Northeast Ohio connecting urban and rural areas, and direct spending from those visitors is just about $7 million, and a variety of types of hard goods, soft goods, and lodging, because of course many people make multi-day trips out of visiting these trails. Next example is the Mon River Trail system. This is actually a network of 7 trails totaling 49 miles in West Virginia. Annual direct spending, $6 million, annual users, 205,000. Of course, this is far shorter than the Great Redwood Trail, so we can expect many more users and much more of an economic impact. This tells you a little bit about the kinds of information we collect, or some of the other researchers collect in these surveys, to talk to trail users. You know, when they come, do they stay overnight? Do they purchase lodging? Do they purchase bicycles or other goods to support their trip, as well as the kind of things you'd expect, you know, restaurants and cafes and things like that. So the bottom line really is that trails attract visitors and visitors spend money. And this is what we consistently find. And what we see is that a lot of towns recognize the value of this and want to market themselves as destinations. And there are several programs in the country that basically help communities market themselves as trail destinations. One of those is called the Trail Town Program. And they basically provide assistance with marketing, improving services and amenities, sharing success stories from all around the country, and fostering a culture of hospitality and stewardship. And certainly wanted to mention safety. That's always a big concern and a major factor that will be incorporated into the planning of the Great Redwood Trail from the beginning. And what we found in research over many years is a pretty consistent finding that crime generally decreases with development of the trail, especially when you're talking about a previously unused corridor, primarily due to the increased visibility of legitimate trail users, the eyes on the trail, so to speak, and various maintenance and patrol strategies. Also wanted to mention an international program called CEPTED, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And these are internationally recognized principles to deter crime, and many, many communities routinely incorporate CEPTED principles into the planning and design of their trails, so that you're thinking through right from the beginning, what does your access look like? What does your maintenance look like? What does the actual design of the trail look like? So it's a big, important topic. I know we're touching on it fairly briefly today, but wanted to mention a few things that we've learned in our 30 plus years of experience with rail trails across the country. So I'll close there and just say that we are so excited to be part of bringing this amazing vision to life and look forward to continuing to work with you. Back to you,
Laura,
Senator.
Thank you so much, Laura. We're really grateful that you've joined us tonight. And again, we want to hear from you. We are getting literally dozens of questions that are coming in tonight. We're grateful for that. If you'd like to be able to turn in your question, please do so now. Senator.McGuire@senate.ca.gov. That's senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. We have over 1,000 who are watching right now. We welcome you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us on our community conversation focused on the Great Redwood Trail. We're now going to be joined by Kevin Wright. Kevin is with Marin County Parks. He's going to be talking to us about the different segments of the Great Redwood Trail. He's an expert on creating trails and recreation. And while he works in Marin now, he still has his heart in Humboldt County. He spent many years as a project manager for the Redwood Community Action Agency in Humboldt County. He knows this trail, all 320 miles, like the back of his hand. We're grateful that he's with us. Kevin, the floor is yours. He's going to give us an overview of the 320 miles of the Great Redwood Trail. The floor is yours, Kevin.
Thank you, Senator. And I just want to appreciate your ongoing, enduring leadership, you and your staff. You know, as someone who came down to Marin from Humboldt County, I can't say enough about this vision and the fact that it's really removing barriers to local trail development. You know, up in Humboldt County, so many segments were just held up by a lack of collaboration and cooperation. And so your work is just doing wonders up and down the line. I'm going to share my screen just like Laura did. So bear with me for one moment. And let's begin with some beautiful photos. I'm going to begin by just reiterating some of the wonderful vision that Senator McGuire laid out for us earlier on. And then we're going to jump into looking at some specific trail conditions up and down the line. This vision really has two parts. One is that continuous path trail system connecting San Francisco Bay to Humboldt Bay and beyond. That really takes advantage of the Northwest Pacific Railroad line, which in itself is kind of a miracle. You know, this is an intact rail line. So we're not out there buying individual segments, trying to piece things together. This is a very unique opportunity. It crosses 4 entire counties, many, many, many communities, all with their own character. Originally, that rail line started at the San Francisco Ferry Terminal and, as the Senator mentioned, went 320 miles all the way up to Humboldt Bay, to Arcata, and then east to Blue Lake. And in a few minutes, I'm just going to show you a bunch of photos of what some of those places look like, and just say that each segment looks very different. Each community is different. And what this vision seeks to do is really bring all those pieces together and create one holistic vision and experience across 4 counties that we can enjoy. Just take a look at this slide. It's notable how much infrastructure is out there. We'll see some photos of that. But again, you know, you'll see a lot of diversity in trail experience and type as we go up the line. So the second key thing to be aware of here is that there are multiple benefits available to every single community. And this is really where the master plan comes into play, that as you know, we engage around this trail experience, this trail vision across these counties, we can really begin to unpack the benefits for every community. And you know, Laura talked all about economic benefits. There's emergency access for better preparation around fires. We can, of course, set certain regulations around trail use to control things like ignition. There's also things like connectivity within communities as well as well-being, you know, the opportunities for active living. People in their own communities, because of these trail segments that are part of this bigger vision, can get out, get exercise, and really enjoy their community in a new way. We'll also see a lot of opportunities for environmental restoration up and down the line. There are a number of trails that I'm sure you're all familiar with that are similar to this vision in scope and scale. The Pacific Crest Trail is just one of them. We have several trail visions around San Francisco Bay. The Tahoe Rim Trail, I'm sure you're familiar with. I want to point you to the California Coastal Trail, which goes up and down the California coast, because it's a perfect example of the variety of trail conditions that we're dealing with here. The Coastal Trail is on the beach, it's up on the bluff, it's on roadways. We'll be looking for similar opportunities here to create a continuous trail system that takes advantage of all the different landscapes. We got a lot of questions leading up to this town hall tonight about, is there a place to visit currently? Where is this trail vision currently? And I just want to point out here, there are a lot of trail segments that are already constructed from the very north of the line all the way to the very south. And so I really encourage you, one thing we need to do is put together a beautiful map of all these trail segments to make sure that you can get out there and easily access them and experience them, because whether it's Ukiah, whether it's Marin, there are a lot of great places and different experiences you can have already within this vision. So with that, let's start at the very southern end of the line and just look at some beautiful pictures. We're gonna start here in the upper left near the Larkspur Ferry Terminal, kind of by the new SMART station. You can see that paved pathway. You can also see some recent construction around the SMART path. So as Senator McGuire mentioned, there are two key managers of this vision and this trail system as it gets rolled out. One is SMART in the south, so Sonoma and Marin. And then as you head north, there's a new trail agency being formed and also rail banking to secure that corridor for public use in perpetuity. And so that really is going to tie these four counties together. You can see down there on the lower left, there's a really good connection along the SMART pathway with communities. There's already infrastructure in place. As we move into Rohnert Park and Santa Rosa, you can see the train there. There are bridges. And also up in the upper right or left, you can see a bridge connecting a little community pathway that ties local communities right into the main pathway along the SMART corridor. There are also traffic treatments to make it safer to cross major intersections. Here we are in Ukiah. This is a recent ribbon cutting. There's a beautiful trail bridge and just another segment of the Great Redwood Trail being put in place. Now this looks a little different. Here we are in the Eel River Canyon and it looks pretty brushy. You can see the grass growing up through the tracks. I've hiked segments of this and been stung by plenty of bees. I've rafted this segment. It is a wild stretch. However, it's important to note that in the assessment done for this corridor, 75 to 85% of the overall corridor was ready and available for trail use. There are some segments though that can use some upgrades, and I'll show you that in just a second. Here's some old infrastructure along that segment. You literally, if you boat part of the Eel River, you'll boat right over the top of railroad cars. There's so much erosion, and this is a major reason why they shut down this railroad line. You can see the erosion there. Great opportunity for environmental restoration in this segment. But when we talk about the master plan, we're looking at paved pathways in the south, but potentially as we get up into this type of environment, we're looking at more narrow single track or other trail solutions that meet the environment and conditions. Here's some of that infrastructure I mentioned. And then as we get up there into Humboldt Bay and beyond into Blue Lake, you see again, beautiful paved pathways, and active living is alive and well as kids and adults are out on bikes, enjoying the paved pathways all around the bay. And I just want to end by saying, again, thanks to Senator McGuire. And also one thing I want to reiterate that this vision really does is help to remove those barriers within communities so communities can really realize their own active living infrastructure, as well as potentially increase funding for those projects to really speed up those projects. So thanks again, and I'll pull down my screen and hand it back over.
Kevin, that was great. Wonderful overview to be able to essentially get a 30,000-foot view of the different segments, how diverse it is on the 320 miles of the Great Redwood Trail. We so appreciate you being with us today. Both Laura and Kevin are going to be hanging with us to be able to answer your questions here in just a moment. But before we get into your questions, we want to bring in, we call him an all-star in the trail world. His name is Michael Jones, and we're so lucky that he calls the North Coast home. He's uniquely qualified for this project. Michael is the founder of Alta Planning and Design. They're a national firm with over 200 folks working with them who design and implement projects just like the Great Redwood Trail. He lives in Marin, and he truly has been an invaluable resource for the GRT. We're grateful that he is with us tonight. Michael, good evening. He's going to finish us out talking about how trails get built, how they get funded, the challenges, the opportunities with the Great Redwood Trail. You have 5 minutes, Michael. Welcome. And I know you're going to pull up your PowerPoint.
Great. Thanks, Senator. And thanks for your leadership and vision on this. And it's an honor and a privilege to be able to work on this project. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully I can do this. Is that, everybody can see that?
We got you right there. Absolutely.
Great. Well, I'm going to talk about building the Great Redwood Trail. You've heard a bit of background on rail trails in general and got a quick tour. You'll notice some similar photographs. We've had some people, colleagues of ours, hike through this corridor, and we're able to share some photographs between the presentations. I'm going to talk about how we get from where we are now to how do we get to a built trail. And so the process for, I'm going to talk about that process and how trails get funded and built and the factors that impact cost. You know, obviously cost is a big issue related to funding and feasibility. How do we manage the trail and make sure that it's safe, protects the adjacent property owners, and basically is a facility that people want to use and feel comfortable using. Addressing some specific stakeholder concerns. You heard a little bit from Laura about that, about how rail trails generally seem to improve safety and crime, but we'll talk about that a little bit, and then the public input process. So the sequence, the process of steps that get taken by specialists are shown in this slide. And the first one has been completed, the assessment, and that really, the purpose of that was really to show the state itself, you know, what would it take to do this project? Is it generally feasible? The purpose of that assessment was not to come up with a final design or a final cost, but really to answer some basic questions of whether we should move to the next step, which it sounds like is underway right now, according to the Senator. Rail banking has been approved by NCRA. And the formation of the agency is, of course, a big step with Senate Bill 69. The technical steps that follow are the master plan, which is sometimes done with an EIR and sometimes not, which is an entire step closer looking at the feasibility, the conditions, the costs, design alternatives. It involves a lot of structural engineers looking at the bridges and tunnels, trying to understand really what can we build and what is affordable and what serves the needs of the public. And following that is a preferred design, and that then starts to move into engineering and design, where it becomes a set of construction documents, and based on that we get a very good idea of the cost, and funding follows that once we know how much it's going to cost or the phases cost, followed by construction bids, and actual construction and operation. It sounds overwhelming, but actually, if you see how quickly some rail trails have gone in cities like Ukiah, it can move pretty rapidly. Some of the things that we really depend on, though, are funding. I think Kevin kind of already mentioned this, but the assessment did identify that most of the corridor is conducive to trail construction, and problem areas are in discrete identifiable locations. About 75 to 85% of the worst part, the most challenging part of the project in the Eel River Canyon is in good physical condition for trail construction. So I think that's a positive way to look at it, because if you've seen some photos of that corridor, they typically are the worst case conditions. So this chart just shows the kind of a typical master plan process. And you'll see at the bottom for each step, the public is involved, from reviewing existing conditions, helping to develop goals and policies and standards and plans, to the needs analysis, trying to understand who's going to use this, how many people, where, what kind of trips, what are their needs. For example, bicyclists and equestrians, not often a great mix on a very narrow trail. So really understand, you know, what do people want to use and where are they coming from? Coming up with the proposed corridor design, and that includes safety improvements, support facilities, water and things like that, and performance standards. And then, as I said, the design engineering, which includes the costs and ranking and phasing. And finally, implementation, funding, liability, monitoring and maintenance, and all public input throughout this. So I think a key question is, for a corridor of this length, is who's going to use it? And probably the answer is all of these groups at some point. I don't know if you're going to get fishermen along the entire corridor, but certainly along the Eel River. Equestrians, in some cases, this would be an ideal equestrian trail. Bicyclists, hikers, and then the next question is how many people will use it in these locations. And we've done some demand projections, and it's quite astounding the number of people that we believe will use this trail, both when it's in towns and cities and when it's out in remote locations. What is the type of trail? That really depends on the first two questions. You know, how many people, how wide do we have to make it? And then how many users do we have to accommodate? And we take those needs and we look at the physical constraints, the impacts on cost and the trail type. What can we reasonably build given the needs and the type of trail to serve those needs? And then next is who will build it. This really impacts funding. For example, if it's state parks, if it's a conservancy, if it's the local agencies, if it's a nonprofit, it really depends. That really impacts the cost and the feasibility, and it also impacts funding because some of those agencies have better access to funding, quite frankly. And finally, what does the public want? I think that's probably the biggest question, is to, in the master plan process, to hear what people want. What are their desires and their concerns? So I mentioned costs, and trails can have a huge variety of costs, and between these two extremes are a million hybrid solutions. On the left are single track unpaved trails. These can be built by volunteers. They can cost as little as $15,000 a mile. This is, they follow the terrain. They don't have to be level. They're not very wide, as you can see, but they're very low cost to build, and they're very flexible in tight terrain. And on the right is a class 1 bike path. You typically find these in cities and towns. The Foss Creek Trail is a good example of this. In Healdsburg, the SMART MEP. And they are primarily funded and built for transportation, and that's why they're in cities and towns. They're really meant for people to get to work and school, but also recreate on the weekends. And they can cost from $2 to $4 million a mile. So the physical condition, you'll see, I think you saw the slide before, it's pretty dramatic, but the fact is that along this corridor, not just in the Eel River Canyon, but in the Russian River Canyon, there are major landslides and continuing movement that are one of the reasons why they closed this rail line for rail service. In fact, the key reason. And so finding a design, you remember I mentioned trail design type, so imagine trying to put a class 1 pathway in an environment like this would be extremely expensive because you'd have to build major bridges and try to keep it as level as possible and fix all these landslides. Construction access is another key thing, and that is, as these photos show, much of this corridor is extremely remote, and to get construction, particularly for something like a class 1, bike path would be very, very expensive just because of the access, the poor access. Environmental remediation was a major issue in the assessment. These are just some, you can see some of the derelict old boxcars and cranes that were left in old diesel fuel containers. The fact of the matter is we don't know the environmental condition, but we have some suspicions. And in the worst case scenario, it could be extremely expensive, but we don't know yet. The primary tests have not been done yet. The major structures, as you saw, the tunnels and bridges, again, these have to be inspected. And if they're reusable, they have to be maintained, probably improved, another factor impacting cost. We understand there's stakeholder concerns, particularly from neighbors, but then also from people wanting to use a trail in a remote location. But issues like privacy and liability, safety and security, and fire, trespassing, litter, impacts agricultural operations, all of these need to be taken extremely seriously and listen very closely to those concerns and work with the property owners and the users to come up with a management plan that identifies ways to mitigate these problems. And luckily, as Laura mentioned, when these trails get put in, you have to remember, for example, they're already homeless living on this corridor. So bringing in the public and redoing a corridor, I think to some extent is going to alleviate or minimize problems. So the management plan will be developed with stakeholders to address their concerns and find suitable design and operational treatments. And as Laura mentioned, trails have been developed in virtually every rural setting with no major increases in negative impacts to neighbors. That is from our surveys around the country. And the public will have a big role on this, and I think the key elements of that for whoever does the master plan is clear communication, transparency, educate people when they need to be educated about every aspect of the trail, workshops, walking tours, surveys, and presentations to make a very interactive, productive session with the public.
You have about 1 minute, Michael.
And this is my wrap-up slide, so that's timely. So, as Laura and Kevin mentioned, this is going to be an iconic American trail. It's going to take its place along with other trails, such as the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, generating substantial direct and indirect economic and environmental benefits to the community. Everything from giving children a safe way to walk to school, to cleaning up the Eel River Canyon, to increasing quality visitor stays in our towns and cities. And as I said, it's a privilege to be able to help. With that, turn it back over.
Michael, thank you so much. We so appreciate you being here for your continued support on this critical project. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Kevin. We're going to be taking your questions and comments here in just a few moments. I just want to very quickly talk about next steps. I think that's important. As we heard from rails to trails from Laura, we did a deep dive into the segments with Kevin. Michael talked to us about what needs to happen to be able to officiate this process moving forward. So let's talk about where we're at. So again, you keep hearing this term rail banking. Rail banking means that we're going to preserve the rail bed so that we can put a trail on top of it. We have to submit a formal application to the federal government to be able to preserve that rail bed. So good news today, the North Coast Railroad Authority, who oversees the rail line currently from the Mendocino County line all the way up to Humboldt, they're going to be filing an official application with the federal government to be able to protect that rail bed from Willits to Samoa. And once that is submitted, we're going to start work on rail banking from Cloverdale to Willits. So first phase of the rail banking will be going from Willits to Samoa, preserving that rail bed so that we can put the trail on top of it. Next phase will be Cloverdale to Willits. The second area of current work is on legislation. It's Senate Bill 69. So we're working on legislation right now that will officially and once and for all disband the North Coast Railroad Authority, which is a hot mess and is bankrupt. And we will officially create the Great Redwood Trail Agency. So we'll transition formally the North Coast Railroad Authority and transition it to a trails agency called the Great Redwood Trails Agency. Now, this is the final step in moving the right-of-way from a rail line to a trail. The bill will also separate the rail line near the city of Cloverdale. So in the north, from Cloverdale to Humboldt County, it will be governed by the Great Redwood Trail Agency. South, from Cloverdale south, it will be governed by SMART, the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit Agency. Now, we also, and finally, we've heard a lot about master planning. My goal with this is to do this project right, not fast. It's complicated. It's not going to be easy, and we have eyes wide open going into it. So here's what this master plan is going to do. It's going to ensure that the public has a seat at the table all the way through. It's going to involve community meetings. We're going to ask you for input. We're going to provide an environmental analysis. The master plan is going to help determine the construction costs. It's going to help determine the operational costs, what material will be used, for example, on specific segments. It's essentially going to be our roadmap on how to be able to develop the Great Redwood Trail, and it's going to put firm costs associated with each of those segments to them as well. So the sooner we can get this started, the master plan, the better. So we're going to be securing dollars over the next 12 to 24 months to be able to move the master plan forward from the state general fund. All right, that's enough from me. Let's go straight into the questions. If you'd like to be able to ask a question, if you want to be able to be part of the conversation, email us right now, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. We're going to ask our panelists to be able to take themselves off of mute at this time, and we're going to go into rapid fire mode. This is going to be lightning round of questions. We've asked each of our panelists to be able to keep their answers to 30 to 60 seconds because we are getting a lot of questions coming in, and again, over 1,000 strong, turning into the Great Redwood Trail Town Hall tonight. Let's get right into it. Michael, Laura, a lot of questions about the cost of this. So I want to reiterate about some of the points because I think it's an important issue. So first and foremost, not all trail segments are created equal with the Great Redwood Trail, meaning a class 1 bike lane, which is asphalt, is probably going to be the minority of the segment, especially in the north. The vast majority of segments in the north will be similar to what you see on a dirt backcountry trail or filling in gravel over the rail. When you get into the cities, you will see asphalt in bike lanes, etc. A lot of folks say, how are you going to fund this? Well, here's the good news so far. We have been able to secure about $30 million to be able to move some critical segments forward over the last 24 months. A 4-mile stretch is moving forward with the Humboldt Bay Trail between Eureka and Arcata. 1.6 miles is about to move forward in downtown Willits. 4.7 miles will be moving forward with the walking, biking path in SMART in Marin, which was approved by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. You heard Kevin talk about the trail segment that opened in Ukiah just last year, in 2019, prior to the pandemic. So where do we get the funding? We get the funding from a variety of sources. So different transportation agencies across the state, local or state, help fund the construction of trails. The Parks Bond that was approved by California voters has literally hundreds of millions of dollars available for Great Redwood Trail and other type of trail projects. In addition, there are nonprofit groups that focus on trail development as well. There are private funders that also advance funding for trails. But let's get into it here, Michael. You said about 70% of the northern section of the trail is ready to go, essentially. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but again, I think it's important to debunk some of the myths that may be out there. We're not looking at the most expensive surface for the trail on the vast majority of these segments. it's going to either be a gravel trail, a dirt trail. But Michael, what say you about those costs?
I think, as you said, I think the costs will depend on the trail type, but the trail type depends on the location and the usage. And along the Eel River Canyon probably will be an unpaved pathway. Could be wider than a foot or two, could be a little wider to accommodate different users. But, you know, as you said, for the most of it, for 70%, 70 to 85%, it's a bench that's already dug out. It's level, it has bridges and trestles and tunnels. Some of them need to be replaced or repaired, but a lot of the heavy work has already been done. And coming in and adding soil to make an unpaved pathway would be very straightforward.
That's great. Kevin, thank you. That's Michael Jones with the Alta Design Group. Let's go to Kevin Wright with Marin Parks. What comments do you have on the budget, surface type, et cetera?
I agree with you and Michael that we really have a large toolbox of trail options for what construction can look like. And really through this master planning, we can put wide paved trails in communities where they work so well to attract visitors and facilitate local recreation. But then as we get into these more wild experiences, single track trails are not only more cost effective, but also they really, in many cases, match the environment that they're put into. And so I think those are great options.
Thank you so much, Kevin Wright, Marin Parks. Let's go to Laura Cohen. Laura, any other comments on budget? Again, it's not created equal. And I think some think that this is going to be a massive price tag. But really, when you get into it, a lot of it is already done for us because you have the rail network. Laura, you specialize in this. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, that's true. You know, a lot of the really heavy lifting was done in creating that rail right of way in the first place. And so that's kind of opens the door for much easier project to create the trail. And yeah, it certainly depends, as my colleagues Michael and Kevin have said, on the context and what kind of trail really would suit the environment that you're in. So you don't want to be overbuilding where you don't need to. And then in towns, it is probably going to be more appropriate to go for a paved path because you're going to have a lot more users. It needs to kind of integrate into your street network. And for those sections, the good news is that there is increasingly active transportation funding sources. That's one of the things that we do as an organization is advocate to create those. So there's a major program at the federal level that Congress has funded for a number of years, transportation alternatives. And we have California has chipped in a lot of state money to match that federal money in our active transportation program. So it's been very encouraging in the time that I've worked in this field at how much more investment there is in the transportation aspect of trails as well as the recreational pieces.
Thank you so much. That's Laura Cohen. We are very grateful. We're going to go to our next question. We're taking your questions right now at senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. We're going to go to Kevin with Marin Parks. Kevin, let's see here. Victor writes in, talking about the Alto Tunnel. Will the project include opening and repairing the old Alto Tunnel between Corte Madera and Mill Valley that has been shut down for over 50 years? That's a bit of a separate project that's happening right now, but Kevin, why don't you give us an update on that?
That's a great question. Actually, I'm wondering if Michael knows the latest on that project.
Please, Michael.
Well, I know that it was studied, the reopening of the Alto Tunnel, and they actually got a civil engineering firm to drop a camera down into the tunnel to see its condition. And the cost was astronomical because basically the tunnel has to be rebuilt. But that would be a separate project. It'd be part of the Great Redwood Trail. But I think it really would be funded by the county and the local agencies who would be the lead agencies on this.
Thank you so much, Michael. Kevin, let's stick with Michael. Michael, we're getting several questions about metal. Where does all the metal go that is decommissioned from the rail line? Now, sometimes you just keep the rail line intact and the metal stays there. It just depends. But Michael, talk to us about how that metal is decommissioned.
You know, in some cases, it's sold for scrap, which could actually help fund the trail. Of course, as I mentioned before, access is not great. So it could be tough to get the steel out of there. But on the other hand, it could be kept and fixed and used to fill between the rails with dirt and have a nice stabilized dirt surface. So there's a couple of different options, but there is a lot of scrap metal, as you saw in those photographs, old boxcars and other things that are laying around that need to be really cleaned up as part of this effort.
We're getting a lot of questions tonight about horses and equestrian use. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. And I know there's going to be a lot of interest. We're hearing from the cycling community. We're hearing from hikers. We're hearing from the equestrian community about why aren't horses included. So I just want to be very candid. That is really, it's too early to say what type of transportation, whether you're on a horse, if you're walking, if you're on a bike, will be included on which segment. So here's where we're at. We have to move forward with the master plan. That master plan will probably take anywhere between 24, maybe 36 months at most. That master plan is going to look at the entire trail segment, all 320 miles, what the construction costs are going to be, what the ongoing operation costs. Is there going to be security costs? What type of material we should use, whether it's in the Eel River Canyon or up along Highway 101 in Humboldt County, what the governance should look like for this agency. And then also, will horses be compatible in certain areas or not? But again, we're just not quite there yet because we have to be able to get this master plan document launched. Michael, talk to us. This master plan, I know you covered it, but let's go into it again. Why is the master plan so important for a complicated project like this?
I would look at it almost like you're looking down from outer space, and the assessment was, you know, maybe 10 miles above the earth, and the master plan gets down to maybe a mile or two above the ground, where you're starting to look at the details. For example, we know there's a lot of landslides and slumps and ground problems on the corridor, but we really need to know, to bring in soils engineers and experts to tell us, should we touch these? Should we try to fix them? Should we try to live with them? Should we bridge over them? What's the cost? What's the impact? All that level of detail, and you can expand that to every aspect of the trail, including, for example, who's going to use it? Because I think the goal of the master plan and of the trail is to accommodate the widest array of users possible. Now, is that going to work in every segment? We don't know, but that's the goal going into it.
Thank you so much, Michael Jones. We're getting a lot of comments here tonight. Dennis writes in a wonderful concept, a great dream, perfect use of abandoned, useless railroad bed. Dakota writes in, absolutely delighted about this, and also wanting to know more about this and what this will mean for our local area. Let's see here. John writes in about the economics. This is coming in for Laura. John wants to know, how can local lodging take part in trails? And in fact, Laura, you see entire campgrounds that up around trails, which means there's bed taxes. Hotels benefit from this. So can you tell John tonight the science around the economic development of trails?
Yeah, sure. This is, there's so many great examples that we can learn from. And just today, I was actually looking at the website for that great Allegheny Passage Trail, the long distance 150-mile trail in Pennsylvania and Maryland. And all the information they have on their website about how to plan a trip there. It's very sophisticated and very complete. And that's the work of a lot of communities and advocates and stewards of that trail to help people think about, okay, what kind of lodging is there camping? How many miles between places can I reasonably get to on a bike? And are there bike services and bike repair and all the things that you would want to take into consideration? So I know that many people who are have B&Bs or Airbnb or motels, hotels are plugged into the planning of those trails because there is a direct benefit. And so it would be important for those voices to be heard in the planning process of the trail. And then certainly, I would encourage all of us to take advantage of the Trail Town program or the other resources out there to, how do we market these towns as destinations, and what kind of amenities and services are people looking for? And that is a perfect opportunity to support local business. 100%.
We're going to go. Thank you so much, Laura Cohen. We're now going to go to our next question. The question comes in from Ken. Can the project be phased and yearly updates given to the legislature? Yes. Being candid, Ken, the only way that we're going to be able to accomplish this project is by phasing it in, as we're doing now, that we're seeing in Willits, as we're seeing in Humboldt County and Marin County. There will not be, for example, a 200-mile segment that would be developed all at once. You're probably going to see 5 miles, 15 miles developed over a few years, especially in the more wild and scenic areas. But Kevin, talk to us about this, because I think that's the important part to remember. This is going to be a phased project. It's going to be done over a series of years. So let's get it into our heads, Kevin, about what this is going to take to be able to build out. We're talking over many years, additional segments being added. Kevin?
That's exactly right. This isn't going to just show up overnight. And, we keep coming back to the master plan conversation, but that's really where we are. We're going to take a broad look at the entire corridor. And part of that is going to be to start to think about the feasibility. Some of these communities have already been working full time at putting segments in place. They have a vision. We're going to connect that vision with some of these places like the Eel River, where it's really, vacant and there's a lot of opportunity there, but to figure out how to make those connections. So yes, you're exactly right. It's going to be phased. We're going to figure out, what can happen first, what can happen later, how much money we have to work with, what the costs look like. And some of that really depends on what the communities want. These communities will weigh into that master planning process and really help these trail segments to take shape based on what they want to see in their community. And so that'll really affect things as well.
That's Kevin Wright from Marin County Parks. We're going to stick with you, Kevin. Robert writes in, he's a board of directors of the Friends of the Annie and Mary Trail. If folks aren't familiar, we're getting a lot of questions coming in from Humboldt tonight. We're hearing from folks from Sausalito all the way up to Arcata tonight. Thank you for your emails. Senator.McGuire@senate.ca.gov. Here's what Robert says. I'm a board of director member for Friends of the Friends of the Annie and Mary Trail between Arcata and Blue Lake. We're wondering about financial support for developing our trail. We've tried twice for grants and the competition is staggering. So here's what I'll say, Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you. We are big fans of the Annie and Mary Trail. Let's just be honest. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the early work of the Friends of the Annie and Mary Trail. We view it as a key segment, really the kickoff of the Great Redwood Trail. And we're going to continue to work with Blue Lake and Humboldt County to be able to make this dream a reality. But Kevin, what say you on the Annie and Mary Trail?
Well, first of all, it's a beautiful trail based on what I've seen, and Blue Lake's a wonderful community. I'll also say, it's really because of leaders like you, Senator McGuire, that funding is made available. You mentioned the passage of Prop 68, which is the park bond back in 2018. That has a whole bunch of money, but it also doesn't have to be the last bond that we pass for major trail projects. So there are a lot of different ways. There are a lot of private funders looking at active transportation projects, and I think there's a lot of promise for trail segments like the Annie and Mary.
Kevin Wright from Marin County Parks. We're now going to be turning it over to Michael Jones from Alta Planning and Design Group. Daniel writes in, from Novato to Cloverdale, how will the Great Redwood Trail construction coordinate with SMART's responsibility to construct their multi-use pathway? And Michael, what I would say is that, look, SMART has a voter mandate to be able to build their trail. It's part of their charter. And we're going to have to work closely with SMART to help them find the financing to be able to get their this segment of the trail completed. But Michael, talk about that coordination, because I think it's critical.
Well, you're right. SMART obviously predates this effort, and as part of their original plan, they have a multi-use path plan for excuse me, along the tracks for most of the segments. a continuous pathway. And, for the public won't really care who owns it. So I think there's going to be a desire to have a consistency, at least in signage, along both the SMART and the other segments. But SMART controls their right-of-way. They'll seek funding. They're already implementing segments and have implemented segments. It will become part of the Great Redwood Trail, but probably just a different organization as the lead agency.
Thank you so much, Michael Jones. Michael Jones with Alta Planning and Design Group. All right, we are doing rapid fire questions here tonight. We're a little after 7 o'clock, so we appreciate our panelists just getting right to them. I know we are getting a lot of questions tonight about the type of trail that will be built. All right, so let's go to Laura and Michael on this. Would the trail also bring Class 4 protected bike lanes to the cities it travels through? And Parker, I don't mean to say this, but it depends. It depends on where in the south, between Marin and Sonoma County, it depends where that rail corridor is. And if they will have protected bike lanes. In many segments of the SMART rail, especially in northern Sonoma County, it runs along a creek. And a trail is now being built along the creek in the trail. But Michael, Laura, talk about that a little bit. Class 4 protected bike lanes. Why don't you define what that looks like, Michael? Class 4 protected bike lanes, and will they be built in cities where available? Michael.
Yeah, buffered bike lanes obviously provide more space for cyclists and are a great solution, particularly in busier roads. And local agencies are installing them. The SMART multi-use path actually is, has certain percentages on street, because it's not always physically feasible to put it on the right-of-way. We might find that to be the case at the Great Redwood Trail and other locations as well. In which case, we'll look, particularly up in Humboldt County, there's some places where there's a parallel road that it might make more sense to put a Class 4 or Class 2 bike lanes along that road than try to fix the pathway. But that will be decided in the master plan process.
Thank you so much. Laura, Kevin, any comments on this, Laura?
Well, I think there's just a phrase that is particularly appropriate: context-sensitive design, which is an approach in planning, and it really says it all. That the way the trail looks and how it will be designed and who will be using it is really dependent on where it is and what is it in a community? Is it in a very rural area between communities? So I think it'll just be really important to pay attention to that, and the master plan will really take a deep dive in making sure that in each segment is unique, and we need to build a trail that is sensitive to its context. And so a Class 4, just carving out a separated piece of the roadway as opposed to a completely separated trail may be the easier and less expensive option. And so that's certainly worth looking at.
All right. I want to go to our next question. This comes from Council Member Melanie Bagby in the city of Cloverdale in Sonoma County. Beautiful community. That's where my mom lives, where my grandparents live. Good evening, Councilwoman. She asks, how will we make sure that cities have planning dollars they need to tie into the Great Redwood Trail into their communities, and make sure that there are gateways and pathways to lodging and facilities for visitors for safe and convenient access for residents? Here's what I'll say. On the Ukiah side, and Kevin, feel free to chime in on this. I mean, there's signage opportunities to be able to tie in on what services are available, for example, in the communities. Very similar to what you see on highways, that there's restaurants or lodging coming up. But it's very similar to that, and it's well marked. And there's coordination with all the Chamber of Commerce and cities about the type of services that would be available. Kevin, talk to us about that. Do a deep dive, because that's really what is so critical when it comes to the economic development. Then we'll go to Laura.
That's exactly right. And, I bet all of us can relate to this. So you go into a new community, you want a trail experience, and you find out that it's hard to locate where to park, where to enjoy the trail, and then where to have lunch afterward. And I feel like one of the great benefits of having a trail vision, both doing the planning within your own community, but also having this 4-county vision, is really to think about how signage connects communities, how it connects resources, how it drives people to those economic opportunities within communities so they know where to dine, they know where to sleep, et cetera, et cetera. It's really bringing together that planning as well as supporting it at the local level.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Laura, you are an expert at this. Look, the councilwoman is absolutely right. There needs to be coordination between cities and the services. How have other smaller communities been able to benefit from this, tying in the trail to everything they're doing when it comes to hospitality? Laura?
Yeah, that's become an increasingly important part of our work is taking the big vision, the regional vision, because trails cross boundaries and the users really don't care if they've crossed a city boundary or a county, and all of a sudden, you don't want the infrastructure to just stop and be at a dead end. So I think that's what's so valuable, that you've created this big vision and the planning is for the whole 320 miles. So we're going to be thinking about how all the pieces fit together, and that needs to stay true through not only the construction, but the management of the trail. And I think there's lots of great examples like the ones I shared earlier, these long distance trails that do cross many jurisdictions. And there's one place, a lot of them have a dedicated stewardship group, a nonprofit like the Friends of the Katy Trail or the Friends of the Gap Trail. And so you get that added kind of public partner with the agencies to really be thinking about the user experience and tying it all together. So it's a cohesive experience, and you're crossing jurisdictions, but everybody is kind of singing from the same hymnal.
Thank you so much. And Councilwoman, we appreciate you writing in tonight. All right, I'm gonna stick with Laura here and want to say thank you so much. Laura is just this trail expert. She's with the she's a Western Regional Director for Rails to Trails. So we are getting, let's see here, we're up to about 30 questions about where I can camp along the trail. Folks are ready for this. We all have pandemic fatigue. Let's just be honest, right? So Laura, we have to do this master plan process. We're going to look at facilities as part of the master plan. It's still early. Folks are really excited about this. But Laura, talk to us about other trails and other rural communities. You said now over 20,000 miles of rail trail. And what you see right across America, folks stepping up yurts, campgrounds, bed and breakfast. But Laura, talk about that on how critical that is and how do you plan for that? I know you've talked about it, but we're having folks jump in and out of the broadcast. So I want to make sure you hit that hard.
Sure. Yeah, well, especially you want to look at other long distance trails around the country, and there are many of those. And there's a lot that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's so many great lessons that we can learn from. But yes, absolutely. Camping experience, especially in a trail that goes through a lot of beautiful wilderness and wild areas in rural counties, as well as, in-town kind of amenities. And, some of the websites for these other long distance trails are really great examples. Like, I want to camp. Where are the options? Where are they located? How can I plan my trip? So the organizations that form to help steward these long distance trail projects have really put together some amazing websites that really help the visitor plan the whole trip and all the options for how to stay and how will you be walking, riding, biking, equestrian. And I would also add that, I'd love to have people be imagining not only kind of the nuts and bolts of the planning process of, how do you want to use this, but think about the creative amenities that you want. How can this trail reflect a sense of place or the history of your community? Did the railroad play a big part in your community? And can you have educational elements along the trail to reflect that, or public art? There's really just opportunities to really make these unique places that reflect your community.
Thank you so much, Laura Cohen. She's the Western Regional Director for Rails to Trails. All right, we're now going to be going to Michael Jones. He has done such fantastic work with Alta Design Planning and Design Group. Let's talk about wildfires, Michael, tonight. Look, there is concern in the community that bringing a new trail to the North Coast could mean enhanced fire danger. Understand why there would be a concern. But what we've seen, at least throughout the West, is trails, individuals who take them, really haven't been the sources of wildland fires in California, throughout the West, or across the country. Hikers generally, candidly, aren't smokers, number one. Number two, having more eyeballs on a specific area is always better than not having any. And trails also offer enhanced emergency access. But Michael, you're the expert at this. A lot of the fires that we've seen caused by vehicles, caused by PG&E, SoCal Edison. But Michael, what say you about fire danger, trails, and individuals hiking?
Well, I think the first thing is to say that fires in California are a concern, period. And you can't really look at any project, particularly a project like this, which is introducing the public to new remote areas. It's not something that doesn't have to be considered. As you said, historically, at least in the recent history of California, the fires have not been started like on the Pacific Crest Trail or on trails. In fact, I would say the trails and a lot of times have cleared out, for example, homeless encampments where fires do start. I think that you really have to take a holistic approach to this in the management plan, work with the appropriate agencies and the public. And as you said, look at ways to mitigate any concerns. There could be fire prohibitions during certain periods. Could be rangers that patrol. There could be, weed abatement. There could be any number of things that could be done to mitigate this problem. But I think this will all be done in the master plan and the management plan.
That's Michael Jones from the Alta Design Group. So let's talk about, there's a lot of folks that want to hear, and we're going to wind down here in the next 5 minutes because I know that we're getting late, but we now have over 1,000 questions tonight that folks have submitted. So we want to try to hit as many as possible. So let's do a lightning round. So public process, folks are asking about public process, how they can participate. So next steps, number one, we encourage you to be able to, participate in the legislative process with SB 69 that will be winding down the NCRA and then winding up the new trail agency. But the big issue is going to be the master plan. So Michael, I want you to hit this again, if you can, less than 60 seconds. Talk about how the public participates in a master plan process.
You know, it's really evolved. Public participation techniques have evolved because of COVID. You know, we traditionally have done workshops and field review and surveys, but because of COVID, we've developed online techniques that are very interactive, let people mark maps up, provide commentary, talk to each other, share ideas. In some ways, it's become a little bit more inclusive, but you really have to work hard in every community to make sure that you're not overlooking any groups. For example, parents are oftentimes very busy and tired after work, and so you don't get a lot of participation from some groups. Children are usually not there. The older population is usually not there. So minorities sometimes are not there. So I think you really have to make an effort to be inclusive and to listen and to be very transparent in the decision-making process.
And what I also say, especially in the northern section, we need to be able to work with landowners. We need to be able to work with tribal governments, right? And individual outreach. I think it's going to be really critical, in particular, working with tribal communities on the North Coast to be able to have a say and have a seat at the table is going to be really important. I'd like to be able to go to LaTanya. So look, Laura, I want to start with you, and then I want to talk to Kevin. So here's what LaTanya says. Are the developers looking to restore the entire rail trail? LaTanya, on certain portions, there will be some portions of the Great Redwood Trail that will be alongside the rail. There will be portions, especially in the north, that will be on top of the trail. So she asks, how can the development team ensure the population, neighbors along the trail, would not be adversely affected by the trail? So let's get into that tonight, Laura, because you've been doing this your entire life. and neighbors are always concerned. And let's be honest, especially in the north, you got a lot of agricultural and farms. You got vineyards, you have cannabis farms, you have a lot of cattle on the range. How do you work with agriculture and neighbors when it comes to the development of a trail like this? And then I could go to Kevin to talk about on the ground.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, an issue that's come up many, many times, and not only agriculture, but neighbors and how will it affect any residents living right along the trail. And so, number one is have an inclusive planning process so that folks have an opportunity to go in and talk about their concerns and ask these questions and get answers from the consultants about how will this be designed to take my concerns into account. And we also have the opportunity to learn from many, many other trails along agricultural lands and farming communities that have successfully navigated this. And so it's really about making sure that you're listening to the ag community and that you're pointing to successful examples. How can we learn from other communities? So, it may be about important fencing and separation. It may be, I know here in the East Bay communities, there are areas where they were doing aerial crop spraying. And so they coordinate with the trail management agency to make sure that they close the trail during the crop spraying so everybody stays safe. So lots of strategies that we can learn from.
Thank you so much, Laura Owen with Rails Trails. Now we're going to go to Kevin Wright with Marin County Parks. So Kevin, talk to us about that, because that's always a concern, rightfully so. How will neighboring landowners be impacted? How do you mitigate that?
This reminds me of planning the California Coastal Trail from Humboldt to Del Norte County years ago. And in that process, I'm thinking back to the campgrounds conversation we just had, and the fact that part of the process is really working our way down the corridor and looking at existing campgrounds and other types of overnight amenities. And, in some cases they are near the trail. In other cases, we had to figure out, how far away is it from the trail? Does this make sense? But the whole time we were doing two things. One was really thinking in terms of privacy and protection of neighbors, because they're really not just neighbors for a planning process, but they're long-term neighbors. And it really gets to Laura's point about the fact that this is not just a one-time conversation, but it's really an ongoing conversation as neighbors about how to manage these facilities in partnership with all the different land uses going on around them.
And it's important, right? And I think that's, again, I can't stress this enough tonight. If you don't take anything else away, we want to do this right, not fast. I can't tell you the number of folks who are ready to get out on the trail. There are a lot of critical steps. Number one, we got to wind down the NCRA this year. Number two, we got to get this rail banking application into the feds and to be able to preserve that rail bed, to be able to put the trail on top of it. And we got to secure the funding for the master plan. And that master plan is essentially our roadmap, our Bible to the future of the trail. It will determine construction costs and operational costs and security needs, how we're going to be able to tackle fire danger, how we're going to deal with potential homelessness issues. You name it, that master plan is going to be focused in on it as well. Speaking of that, questions about ongoing funding. So Alex writes in, the Pacific Crest Trail requires permit to access much of the trail with a fee associated with the permit. That's not something that we're thinking about at this time with the Great Redwood Trail, but his point is the permits and fees are used to help prevent overuse and to offset the costs of improving and maintaining a trail. So Kevin, Michael, Laura, talk to us about other trail systems in the United States. Has anyone been successful with developing an ongoing funding model? Who would like to kick us off? Kevin.
I'll kick us off. I'll just say three things. One, alive and well up in Humboldt County around the Bay is the Volunteer Trail Stewards. And that group grew out of the fact that there is very little money for ongoing operations and maintenance. So there's a huge volunteer force out there. It's not the end-all solution, but that is part of the solution. And then we've, talked about and we formulated a bit of a friends organization that we plan to grow over time when the opportunity is right. And that's an opportunity for people to get involved as well as donate money for operations. Lastly, I'll just say that when it comes to state funding, there are a lot of opportunities to do things like forest management and environmental preservation, as well as take care of our recreation facilities together. And so we'll be looking at opportunities like that.
Thank you so much. Michael Jones, talking about ongoing funding for trails.
Yeah, that is a tough subject for parks and trails because it's difficult to obtain operating funds, but there are monies out there. There are grants, for example, available for trail repair equipment. And also in the design process, really one of the key things we're trying to do is to make sure that maintenance really has to be minimized. You don't want to create something that is very difficult to maintain. So, I think there's a lot of, as Kevin said, there's volunteer groups. There are regional park agencies that have very good maintenance funding, like East Bay Regional Parks. That's a property tax-based park district, but that's kind of the exception to the rule. But that's something that will be included in the master plan, and there will be a solution that comes out of that.
Michael Jones, thank you so much. Laura Cohen, Rails Trails.
Well, I think Michael and Kevin made a lot of the points that were occurring to me, but yeah, I think on the maintenance side, because bond funding, for instance, tends not to want to support maintenance and operations funding, it's really about cobbling together local and state, other state funding with volunteers and stewardship groups and private philanthropy. So it's usually a kind of a mix of those things to kind of get a little bit creative to cover those costs.
Thank you so much, Laura Cohen. All right, we're going to go to our last three questions, then we're going to ask our panelists to be able to wrap us up with 30-second closing comments. All right, Kevin, you have been out on the vast majority of the 320 miles. We're getting a lot of questions about how difficult will it be to hike some of these segments. So Mary writes in, how difficult will it be for me to hike? It depends. If you're in a city, it's easy schmeezy. If you're out on the Eel River Canyon, you got a hell of a trail that you are hiking on. So Kevin, talk to us about that.
Well, the Eel River is a lot worse now than it will be in the future. I think it really depends on where that trail is placed specifically. Right now we're talking about a river corridor. And so while there are segments that are exposed, during the heat of the summer and things like that, it's not that hard to walk on. But if we have to travel up over some hills or around some tunnels, that's where you'll get some steep terrain there. But of course, we'll be looking at all options for trail alignments. And it makes sense to build it in a way where the majority of people who want to can hike it.
That's Kevin Wright from Marin County Parks. Thank you so much, Kevin, for being with us. Michael Jones, final question for you tonight. All right, Philip Hicks asked a question that we're getting a lot of. How are you going to keep walkers, hikers, nature lovers safe from, in parentheses, swear word, cyclists who are destroying dirt hiking trails in Marin? Look, we are not going to get into that debate here tonight because I know that's an entrenched debate and we will have swear words. But how does it work about determining who gets to be on what segment of trail? Michael.
That is a really good question. And the answer lies in the fact that your busiest trails are going to be paved relatively wide pathways in cities and towns that should be wide enough for, runners, hikers, walkers, people with dogs, bicyclists. Now, when you're talking about a single track trail, it is true that you have some conflicts. It really depends on the volumes and it depends on the design. If you have a design of a trail that's extremely steep and poor visibility, makes it problematic to share between uses. If it's a little wide enough and there's proper trail etiquette, maybe supported by regulation and by rangers, then you can start to share it. But again, it's a matter of volume, design. The goal is to have as many people as possible from different user groups use each trail segment. So it really is trying to design a facility that will accommodate them all.
Michael Jones, thank you so much. Grateful that you're with us tonight. Laura, you got the last question tonight, and we're going to have two questions in one for Laura. Litter and garbage and property values. So a lot of questions tonight about how rural isolated trails have dealt with litter and garbage. And there's a lot of folks that worry that this trail will impact their property values. Can you tackle both, Laura Cohen, rails and trails?
Sure. Yeah, litter and dumping is certainly an issue, and it needs to be taken into account. That's the kind of thing that you want to be talking about in the community outreach section during the master plan. Places that are close into town, patrolling and enforcement will be a little easier. It's going to be more challenging on the remote areas. But if they're remote enough, then you're probably not going to get a lot of dumping because vehicles won't be driving up to the trail at the Eel River either. So it'll really be kind of figuring out those access points and having enough of eyes on the trail to deter that, and selected enforcement so that when people do it and they get caught, they're not inclined to do it again. It's hard to say it's not going to happen. I mean, it's probably, we're probably going to have to deal with that. And there are, good examples out there. It's going to be a little more challenging in the remote areas to, keep an eye on things, but that will be important to make sure the message gets out that, if you do this, we're going to find you. On the property values, we've collected a lot of information about this over time, and we share a lot of it on our website. And property values, generally what we, some of my favorite things are cutting out real estate ads that are advertising, here's some homes in this development, and the ones right along the trail are selling at a premium because people have actually created gates in the fencing in their backyard to access the trail because it just becomes, easy recreation, or the kids are biking to school and the parents feel comfortable with them doing that out of traffic. So it's been interesting that sometimes the fear is I want to put up a fence, and then they put a gate in the fence because it's like, no, actually, I love having that access. So the property values generally are positive, and that does depend on a well-managed trail where everybody is kind of being respectful in their use of the trail. So that is certainly important.
Thank you so much, Laura Cohen, Rails and Trails. It sounds like becomes a little bit of like I don't want to over exaggerate, but a little bit of a beachfront property, right? People, so you can have immediate access to that trail, just like you would want for a beach. Would that be incorrect or correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It becomes an amenity that you grow to appreciate, I think, more and more as you have that convenient access.
Thank you so much, Laura Cohen, Rails and Trails. All right, we're going to have closing comments. We want to say thank you so much to all of you who have tuned in tonight. So many questions. I promise you this, there are going to be many more forums like this tonight to come in the coming months and years about the Great Redwood Trail. A lot of progress has already been made. A lot of work is to come, but let's go to closing comments here tonight. Let's start with Michael Jones, 30 seconds closing comments.
I think that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, not just for me and for the group that I work with, but for the residents in the North Coast area to have a facility like this that they can enjoy, not just some place where they're going to go out and hike 20 miles, but for their kids to be able to get to school by bicycling or walking, improving safety, helping the local economy, providing good jobs. I think this will become a treasured facility for the North Coast for many years to come.
Michael Jones, thank you so much from Alta Planning and Design Group. We're grateful that you joined us tonight. We're now going to turn it over to Kevin Wright. Maureen Parks, closing comments, please.
First of all, thank you for inviting me tonight. It's been great to be here with you all. I just want to say, as a land manager, what we've seen during COVID, there's been extraordinary increase in public use of public lands and a huge demand for outdoor recreation facilities. And the fact that this vision is literally happening in the backyard of the Bay Area and connects us up to Humboldt County is just extraordinary. And if you've ever just driven from the Bay Area up to Humboldt County, you see the variety of experiences. And I just personally cannot wait not that's going to happen overnight, but to hike the entire length of the rail corridor, because it is just full of so many experiences and characteristics and communities. I can't even really imagine it at this point.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wright with Marin County Parks. Grateful for your leadership along with Mr. Jones. And she started us out. She's going to end us tonight. Let's go to Laura Cohen she's the Western Regional Director for Rails to Trails. Finish us out.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. I have to say, when I heard that there were more than 2,000 people who RSVP'd to participate tonight, wow, I was blown away and so inspired by that level of interest and enthusiasm. I know that a lot of you still have questions and concerns, so please stay involved. We want to hear from you as we proceed with planning this trail. We want it to serve you. And I know Senator McGuire's office will be a great conduit of information of how to participate. And finally, the idea that this trail would ultimately be the longest rail trail in the country is super exciting. Our organization will certainly be promoting it and talking it up. And, we've also got a program, Hall of Fame trail program, where we honor one trail each year because it's just an outstanding example of a rail trail. So I've got this one in mind for nomination when we get a little farther down the line. So really excited to be a part of something that's this big and exciting.
Laura Cohen, thank you so much. Western Regional Director for Rails to Trails. And I'll just finish it out by saying there are very few times in our lifetime that we can advance a transformational project. And by working together, that project is staring us right in the face. That's the Great Redwood Trail. It will connect four counties of communities. It will be able to bring economic development to some of the most rural communities, and let's be candid, some of the poorest communities in this state. It will offer us an opportunity to be able to advance broadband on the trail base. And it will connect us as people. And especially during this pandemic, that's what we need now more than ever. This is going to be more than a trail. It's going to be a gathering grounds, a gathering grounds for locals and visitors alike. And we couldn't be more excited to continue to move this project forward. And we're going to do this right, not fast. You're going to continue to hear me say that because we owe that to you. We owe you a robust community outreach effort. We owe you answers to really tough questions. And we owe you a master plan. So here are the next steps. We're going to be advancing a budget request to be able to secure funding to launch that master plan in the next 12 to 24 months. That master plan, once the funding is secured, will take about 24 to 36 months to complete. That master plan will be our roadmap for the years and decades to come. We want to hear from you. If you have questions, comments, concerns, and especially criticisms, email us, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. Email us, senator.mcguire@senate.ca.gov. And we look forward to continuing this conversation, not just in forums like this, but when we can, across the table from each other. A few thank yous tonight. We want to say thank you to our amazing panelists. We want to say thank you to Carrie and Dana and Emily, who have helped put this together tonight. And a special thank you to Jason Lyles. Jason Lyles, who is in our office, has been the project manager on the Great Redwood Trail, and we wouldn't be here tonight without Lyles's hard work. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us here this evening. We look forward to making this dream a reality here in the weeks, months, and years to come. Let's get the Great Redwood Trail built. Have a great night and stay strong, Northern California.